So this is problem 5. Kiwi exchanges an apartment complex for a farm in a transaction that qualifies as Section 1031 exchange. So let's stop right there. Section 1031 exchange means it meets the criteria of the like-kind exchange non-recognition rule. Right? Remember, you have a transfer of real property for real property, and on both sides, the taxpayer at issue, holds it for business or investment, business or investment. Now we're told that Kiwi exchanges an apartment complex for a farm, and if I told you that, you would say, okay, yeah, it's real property for real property, but nowhere in the problem does it tell you that Kiwi holds the farm for business or investment. So that's where you need that Section 1031 aspect. So I'm telling you, hey, it does qualify, which means that, hey, Kiwi did hold it for business or investment. So you can infer from that, that's what that means. So it does qualify for Section 1031 exchange treatment. Okay? Kiwi's basis for the apartment complex is $600,000, and the complex is subject to a $180,000 mortgage. The fair market value of the farm that Kiwi's going to receive, right? So I just told you about the apartment complex Kiwi's giving up. Here's the information about the farm. $778,000 fair market value, subject to a $100,000 mortgage. Each property is transferred subject to its respective indebtedness. So that means that Kiwi had that liability on the mortgage, no longer has it, but it's taking on the liability on the farm. So we're just doing a simple swap of everything, property and the liability. What's Kiwi's recognized gain or loss on the exchange, and what is his unadjusted basis in the farm? So 2 things I want to mention about what it's asking. In previous problems, we went through 3 parts. Realized gain or loss, recognized gain or loss, and the basis of the new property. So first thing, you might notice I'm not asking you for the realized gain or loss. So this is a little tricky. After going through multiple problems now of like-kind exchange, you probably have this idea, but I want to make it clear. If I ask you for the realized gain or loss in a like-kind exchange, if I ask you for the recognized gain or loss, just like this one's asking, and I don't ask you for the realized gain or loss, it's possible you may still have to determine the realized gain or loss, but you might not have to. So, for example, if the problem, there's no boot in the problem, it's simply just like kind for like kind. Guess what? And I just ask you for recognized gain or loss, it's 0. Don't waste your time calculating the realized gain or loss unless I ask for it. But if a problem I ask you for the recognized gain or loss, and in the problem there is boot, you do have to calculate the realized gain or loss because of the special rule. The special rule says it's the lesser of the realized gain or the amount of boot. So you're comparing the boot with the realized gain. So to calculate the recognized gain, you need to have the realized gain, even though it doesn't ask you for that. The second thing I want to note is it says unadjusted basis in the farm. So in our previous problems, it just said adjusted basis. If someone asks you for the unadjusted basis in an asset or the adjusted basis in the asset, whenever you have a sale, exchange, other disposition, it's equal because it's immediately after the transaction. But the difference between unadjusted basis and adjusted basis happens over time. When you adjust your basis for depreciation or amortization, or you increase it for improvements, that's when you have a difference between unadjusted basis, which is when you initially get it, and the adjusted basis. So here, I'm asking you for the unadjusted basis, but it's the same thing as adjusted basis. They're the same. They're equal. Because it's when you initially acquire the property, right? Kiwi is getting the farm initially. I'm not asking you, hey, 10 years later, that will be the adjusted basis. So keep that in mind. Just because you have unadjusted basis, it's nothing different. Okay. So let's go back to what's going on here. Again, we need to recognize gain or loss and the unadjusted basis in the farm. We're just going to say the adjusted basis in the farm because they're equal here. Because it's all initially when Kiwi gets it. So going back to my issue of if we're trying to determine the recognized gain or loss and you have boot, then you got to start with realized gain or loss. Kiwi has liability relief. Kiwi is giving up an apartment complex that has a liability on it. $180,000. Kiwi is no longer responsible for that $180,000 liability. Means the other party takes it on. That's considered constructive cash received, liability relief. Therefore, Kiwi has boot, potentially boot. But still, at that point, you need to determine the realized gain or loss. So we're going to start with calculating the realized gain or loss. So remember our realized gain or loss. The formula is amount realized, I'm going to abbreviate AR, minus AB. So let's start with the amount realized. So amount realized is going to be the actual cash received plus the constructive cash received plus the fair market value of the non-cash property received minus selling expenses. But remember, in this problem set for non-recognition, like-kind exchange, involuntary conversion, I'm not going to do selling expenses. So we got our three elements. Let's calculate the amount realized. We're asking, what is Kiwi getting? What I like to do, and I didn't do this in earlier problems, but at this point, I want to show you, since you have an exchange that qualifies for 1031, you know Kiwi's getting non-cash property, right? Kiwi's getting the farm. What's the fair market value of the farm? Okay, we're told the fair market value of the farm is $770,000. So we put $770,000 there. Is Kiwi receiving any actual cash? No. There's no actual cash, either inflow or outflow in this problem at all. However, there is constructive cash received. That's the $108,000 mortgage on the apartment complex. Kiwi owned that apartment complex before. Now Kiwi does not own it. Kiwi is no longer responsible for that apartment complex. Okay, so that's going to be $180,000 of constructive cash. So our amount realized is equal to $950,000. The adjusted basis is the adjusted basis of the property given up. All right? It's the adjusted basis of all the property given up. So we start the adjusted basis of the building given up, which is $600,000, right? The apartment complex, plus the liability taken on. So Kiwi's taking on a $100,000 mortgage on the farm. That's $100,000 there. We add in, and there's no actual cash being paid. So Kiwi's adjusted basis of the property given up is $700,000. Kiwi's realized gain or loss is $250,000. Okay, so we've calculated the realized gain or loss is $250,000. Now we're going to move on to step 2. Calculating the recognized gain or loss. So the recognized gain or loss, we have boot here. So the special rule applies. The special rule says it's the lesser of realized gain, which we just calculated as $250,000, or boot, which is specifically the net boot. So remember, we saw this in earlier problems. When you have both boot received and boot paid, right, which you'll look at the two lines, the two rows, that's what I mean, you know you have some boot received, some boot paid. So remember our rules. The general rule says that all boot, sorry, not all, my apologies. There's that language I keep using. Boot paid can offset boot received, but there's an exception that says liabilities taken on can only offset liability relief. So that means here, if you have a number here, this $100,000, it can only go up. It can't go cannot go over here, cannot go this way for offsetting different types of boot. Okay? So then we have our two steps. Step one is to determine the net liability relief boot, right, which is liability relief minus liability taken on or liability paid, whatever you want to call it, same thing. Liability relief here is $180,000 minus liability taken on is $100,000. That gives us $80,000 of net liability relief. Remember, in step two, we bring that down if it's positive, which it is. If it's not positive, it's negative, then you're going to put that as zero because you can't have negative there to offset other types of other types of boot received. Then we add other boot received minus other boot paid, which there's none here in this problem, right? There's nothing else. 0, 0, and we don't have any non-cash, non-like-kind property. So that means that for step two purposes, we have $80,000 of net boot. So then we bring over that $80,000 here, and it's the lesser of $250,000 or $80,000. The recognized gain is $80,000. Before we do step three, we determine the suspended gain. Suspended gain is difference between number 1, $250,000 and $80,000, $178,000. Keep that in mind. Now we go to step three. Step three, we calculate the adjusted basis of the new property received by Kiwi, which here is the farm. That's what Kiwi is receiving, is the farm. So the formula is the old adjusted basis plus any money paid minus money received plus gain recognized, and we don't have any loss recognized, so I'm just going to leave that one off. If you had loss recognized, you would subtract it. So the old adjusted basis were given to us, the problem in the apartment complex, the old property, $600,000 plus money paid. There's no actual money, but there's constructive money of $100,000. Any money received? Yes. There's constructive money of $180,000. And then gain recognized is $80,000. That brings our basis to $600,000. Okay, so we've done step three. We can conclude by checking our work. So we check our work. We assume the next day Kiwi sells the farm for the fair market value. Just use fair market value, $770,000 cash minus the adjusted basis we calculated, which is $600,000. That gives us $178,000 gain that will be realized and recognized because it would be for cash. And guess what? The suspended gain equals $178,000 check your work gain. So it equals, and we're finished with this problem.